You felt it. The moment the conversation shifted. Something was said. Maybe it was unfair, maybe it was cruel, maybe it was just slightly wrong, and every part of you knew it. But you didn't say anything. You went quiet. Not because you had nothing to say, you had everything to say. The words were right there, fully formed, precise, devastating if you'd chosen to use them. But you didn't. You went somewhere else instead, behind the eyes, into that familiar place where nothing gets in and nothing gets out. And the other person kept talking, maybe got louder, maybe pushed harder, and you just weren't there anymore. Later, hours later, maybe days later, the conversation replayed in your head. Every word, every moment, everything you should have said. At 2 a.m., in the shower, on the drive to work. If you know exactly what I'm describing, this video's for you. Because what you just heard isn't a communication problem. It's not weakness. It's not passivity. It has a name. And once you understand it, you'll finally understand yourself. Let's start with what people get wrong. When GenX goes silent during conflict, the people around them usually assume one of two things. They think you don't care, or they think you're giving them the silent treatment, using quiet as a weapon. Both of those assumptions are wrong. And if you've ever tried to explain what's actually happening in those moments, you already know how hard it is to find the words. Because what's happening isn't strategic, it isn't calculated, it isn't indifference.
Here's what's actually happening. Your nervous system has been triggered. Not in the way people casually throw that word around. Triggered in the clinical sense. Your brain's threat detection system, the same system that processes physical danger, has registered this moment as unsafe. Not dangerous in the way of fire's dangerous, emotionally dangerous. And when that system activates, it doesn't ask for your opinion. It doesn't check whether the threat is real or imagined, proportionate or not. It acts. And for GenX specifically, the action it has learned to take is silence.
Psychologists call this a freeze response. Most people know about fight or flight. The freeze response is less discussed, but research consistently shows it's the most common response in situations where fighting feels dangerous and fleeing is impossible. You can't fight. Not here. Not safely. You can't run. The person is right in front of you. So you go still. And in that stillness, you survive. Here's the part nobody ever told you. You didn't choose this response. It was trained into you. Think about what conflict looked like in the house you grew up in. For many Gen X children, conflict between adults was something that happened to you, not something you participated in. It was loud, or it was ice cold, or it was the kind of tension that filled every room without anyone saying a single word. And as a child, you had exactly one job in those moments. Don't make it worse. So you made yourself small. You went quiet. You disappeared into your room, into a book, into yourself, and you waited for it to pass. And it worked. Your silence kept you safe. Not because anyone told you to be silent, but because your nervous system ran the numbers and came back with a clear answer. When things get heated, stillness is survival. Research on parental emotion socialization, the way children learn to handle emotions based on how emotions were handled around them, consistently shows that children raised in households where emotional expression was punished, dismissed, or unsafe develop what psychologists call emotional suppression as their primary coping strategy. Not as a choice, as an automatic response that gets faster and more efficient with every year of practice. Some Gen X children were told directly, stop crying, you have nothing to be sad about, I'll give you something to cry about. Some didn't need to be told. They just watched what happened when adults expressed their emotions and learned very quickly that feelings were liabilities. The researcher Megan Seekamp, writing about Gen X and emotional suppression, described it this way. We were raised by people who didn't talk about their pain, not because it wasn't there, but because silence was safer. And then came Gen X, and we learned the same lesson, not from a textbook, from watching. Here's what that creates. A generation of people who are extraordinarily good at containing themselves, who can hold a full conversation while bleeding out emotionally inside, who can sit across from someone saying something genuinely unfair and give nothing away. The silence isn't absence of feeling, it's the presence of too much feeling with nowhere safe to put it. Here's what nobody sees. When GenX goes silent, the inside story and the outside story are completely different. Outside, calm, controlled, maybe even unsettling in how still they are. Inside, a full conversation is happening at high speed. Every unfair thing that was said is being cataloged. Every word is being weighed. Arguments are being assembled, dismantled, reassembled. The full case for why this moment is wrong is being built in real time. And none of it comes out. Not because it isn't ready, because something older than reason steps in and shuts the door. Psychologists describe this pattern as emotional architecture, the internal structures people build to contain feelings that were never safe to express. The most common container is silence. But here's what that architecture holds. Not just the pain of this moment, the pain of every similar moment, every time the words were swallowed, every argument that went unfinished, every time something unfair happened and nothing was said. It accumulates. Research on emotional suppression and psychological well-being show that people who habitually suppress emotional expression report significantly higher levels of internal distress, even when they appear outwardly calm. The suppression doesn't eliminate the emotion. It redirects it inward, where it becomes anxiety, resentment, physical tension that lives in the jaw, the shoulders, the chest. And then, later, hours later, days later, the replay. 2 a.m. and the argument is back. But this time, there's no one to say it to, so it runs in a loop. Everything that should have been said, everything that couldn't be, the version of the conversation where you said exactly what you meant, clearly, without apology. This is what emotional suppression does over time. It doesn't resolve the conflict, it relocates it. From the moment into the body, from the body into sleepless nights and replaying conversations and a low-level resentment that never fully clears. Here's something important to say out loud. The silence isn't wrong. It was right once. It was exactly the right response for a child who needed to survive an environment where emotional expression wasn't safe. Your nervous system did its job perfectly. But here's a cost that accumulates over decades: relationships that never get resolved. When the silence becomes the default, when every difficult conversation ends with one person going still and the other person left talking at a wall, things never get finished. The same arguments come back, not because people are trying to be difficult, because nothing was ever actually said. People who love you stop trying. This is the one that hurts the most. When someone consistently meets silence after a conflict, when they can never get to what's actually underneath, they eventually stop pushing. Not because they don't care, because they don't know how to reach you. And you watch them pull back, and some part of you registers it as confirmation of what you already believed. People leave eventually. The rage that has nowhere to go. Research on GenX emotional suppression describes something that stopped me when I read it. A woman in a study said, "I spent decades hiding my rage. It derailed everything until I finally dealt with it." That's not an unusual story for GenX. The anger that couldn't be expressed as a child didn't disappear. It went underground. And underground, without light or air, it doesn't soften. It hardens into a permanent low-level tension, into an exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, into a cynicism that wasn't always there. And the replay, the 2 a.m. conversation, the shower argument with someone who wasn't there, the drive where you finally say everything to no one. This is what unspoken words cost, not just in the moment, every night after. If you spent your life going quiet when things get hard, I want to say something directly to you. You are not broken. You are not passive. You are not a coward. You are someone who learned very young in very real circumstances that silence was the safest container for everything you felt. And you got very good at it. The cost of that skill, and it is a skill built under pressure, is that it kept working long after the situation that required it was over. The question isn't whether your silence was justified. It was. The question is whether it's still serving the life you're actually living now. Because the people in your life now are not the people who made silence necessary. Most of them are just trying to understand you. And they can't. Not because you're unknowable, because you haven't spoken yet. The words are still in there. Every unsaid thing, every argument that replayed at 2 a.m., every moment you knew exactly what to say and said nothing, they're all still there, and they're waiting. Coming up, why Gen X has been called the lost generation, and whether that label is actually true.